when I was asked to talk, I was keen to talk because I really think that the work that the NSTF is important, and I absolutely think that STEM is critically important. But what I'm going to talk about is turning these plans from creative thinking into implementation. And for me, making the ideas real beyond the magical thinking of wouldn't it be nice, is we've got to look at planning in a resource-constrained environment. So I am going to be looking at three main ideas. And one is that we are in a constrained fiscal environment, and that exists for DBE and DHET. And if you're in a constrained fiscal environment, you have to be able to look at what does it mean for planning and what does it mean for evidence-based planning. The document that I've used to prepare this is the NPC, National Planning Commission's advisory on what we need to do in implementing the NDP priorities for the medium-term development plan. I think lots of people may be from government and they understand that the medium-term development plan is government's plan of action for the next 5 years. That's in the process of development to be adopted by our cabinet. But what the NPC has done is said, this is what we think should be the implementation priorities. So that is now available on the website of the NPC if you are interested and have time and are curious. Let's start with what we mean by the realities on the fiscal environment. And I'm going to do this in two parts. First of all, the DBE, and then I'm going to do DHET. So I'm sure this slide presentation will be shared and you can come back and look at the detail. But the Finance and Fiscal Commission, which is a commission established in terms of the Constitution to advise government in terms of particularly the distribution of resources across departments and between levels of government, has said that we are going to see, we've seen reduction on spending on basic education, and we're going to see increased reduction of spending on basic education. The reason for that is because we have had slow economic growth and different economic shocks, including COVID. So that has implications for how we reprioritize within basic education, education more broadly, and indeed all departments, and that we have to cut spending. So the FFC shows that the basic funding sources for basic education have been reduced, and they anticipate that this is going to continue. They say, and this is all the way back to 2022, that the reductions in what we plan is going to increasingly be reduced. And that means that there's cuts in what's available in real terms and in terms of what's available per pupil. So what that means is, well, the Public Economy Project is at Wits, and they did a very detailed paper. If anyone wants the reference, I'll make it available. But they say basic education is going to see real declines in resources, real spending, reduced investment, employee compensation, and in goods and services. So what we're going to see, the PEP says, is larger class sizes, reduced spending, such as textbooks, school infrastructure. Sorry to be depressing, but that's the reality. And I think that as we look at taking these brilliant ideas that have been presented in this forum, we've got to not become despondent, but become more focused. When I look at DHET, and I've put this advisory very firmly on the screen because this comes from the advisory. If you look at the Department of Higher Education and Training, complete proposal for the post-school education and training sector. So the white paper was published in about 2013, I think, or so, is that white paper, even at the time, acknowledged that the goals were chronically underfunded. And it argued that we would have to, within DHET, really look very carefully at how we reprioritize our funding if they're going to succeed. So that was known all the way back from the white paper, and it was reinforced in the recent PSET plan, is we don't have money to do everything that we imagine would be wonderful in the PSET sector. So what the NDP's medium-term development plan says very strongly is that DHET needs to reconsider its goals and its targets, and it's got to be informed by the money that's available for the medium-term fiscal program. The medium-term budget statement informs that. It's a 5-year medium-term expenditure framework. And we've got to update our plans to align with the fiscal realities. That is a major challenge for DHET. If we go now to what I mean by planning across national and provincial, I'm talking here very much about the DBE. The DHET doesn't necessarily have to deal with the national and provincial realities. But this is one of the issues that is coming through very clearly in the work of the NPC, is that the DBE can develop policy-informed, high-level planning frameworks to improve learning performance, particularly for this forum in terms of STEM. But actually, with some exceptions, such as the conditional grant for maths and science, what we imagine has to be implemented by the provinces within their budget. How those plans actually are made concrete happens at district level within the available material and human resources. So let's just talk about what that means. At the moment, things such as textbooks, new textbooks, multilingual textbooks, on the whole, are bought by schools themselves with the norms and standards of school funding money. But we also know that there's about 4 provinces or 3 provinces where the schools are not receiving the amount that's in the guidelines. And many schools are struggling to be able to procure the resources that are necessary in order for example, all children to have a textbook, all children to have the resources that are needed. So why that becomes important is because, I'll pick this up in the next slide, is that we have to be able, in making our plans, to realize that they become real at provincial level in terms of the budget, and they become real at district level, depending on what resources are available. Anybody in the DBE would know that one of my big issues is the assumptions we make about support that's offered to teachers. Support that's offered to teachers is firstly, or maybe not firstly, maybe there's not a first and second, but firstly, through the subject advisor system. But if you look at the number of schools that subject advisors are required to support, it soon becomes clear that most subject advisors are not able to support teachers at a detailed level at school level, and we need much more strategic approaches to how subject advisors support schools. The second component of how teachers are often supported is the issue of the continuing professional teacher development system. But what's quite clear is that, firstly, very few teachers are actually given the opportunity to meet the requirements of the collective agreement and actually have 40 hours of professional development. If you look at the DBE's annual, not annual, they do it every so often years, but the assessment, the school monitoring survey, the SMS, I believe, and I can check, but I remember that it's only 46% of teachers who actually achieve 40 hours of continuing professional development. And my view is that that's not available within the system. So we need to improve the CPDD system so that more teachers are able to take opportunity and meet the requirements of the collective agreement. The second thing that should be of concern to us is that we have regulation, which is that in terms of professional development, the South African Council of Educators is required to maintain the professional status of teachers, and they are supposed to achieve 30 professional development points a year. In the annual reports of SACE, what we see is it's something like 3% of teachers actually report achieving the 30 professional development points. We need to better understand what are the challenges for supporting teachers to improve their learning performance and what we need to do so that our plans actually are targeted towards those realities. Now, why we need those plans is that where we don't have the resources, whatever our imagination and, not only imagination, but our goals, our ambitions, they have to be mediated through the reality that the budget and the human resource is often at provincial level, and we need to understand that better. So the reality is provinces have primary responsibility for implementation, whatever plans we make, and our plans will only be implemented if they're prioritized for funding at provincial level, and that's the reality. So what does it mean? I think that there's a responsibility on national government to much more often have a strategic understanding of the provincial realities. Those are material and they're also human. What money is available, what people are available. And we need to be able to do that differentially across the different provinces, because the 9 different provinces have very different contexts in terms of material and human constraints. And the responsibility that I'm arguing becomes the responsibility of the DBE officials is to have a much more detailed understanding of that so that guidance can be given to provinces in terms of their prioritization. Because if you look at some of the sort of system-wide outcomes, activities, the outputs that we are aiming for, the targets they're aiming for, the DBE has very little control over those. They can't be responsible. The achievement of all of those impacts and outcomes is dependent on actions at provincial level, which therefore means that we have to have this much more nuanced approach of the conditions in each province and how we can support those. And then we have to consider what should be the priorities and programs that we need to prioritize and customize to the differential provincial realities. What that also means for me, and this is something I can talk about forever, is that it's one thing to say, this is what you should be doing. We've now understood your realities, and this is the guidance we're giving you in terms of implementing it. But then we have to monitor implementation much more thoroughly than we do now. Because a policy's been made, because a plan's been set, doesn't necessarily mean that that has reached the teachers in the classroom that we want to support. And the whole monitoring of implementation should be more timeous, more immediate, and more geared towards supporting provinces. So, Ansi, that's all I want to say. And I know that I've already disrupted your program, but if there's opportunity before I leave at 2, I'm open for questions. Thank you.